Hey guys, this is Luke with Dad Life Chess. This week I'll be doing another video like I did last week, looking at an over-the-board game that I played at the local chess club on Wednesday of this week, so a couple days ago now. I did this last week for the first time and it was helpful for me. This is kind of a new experience for me to look at games that I've played over the board. So I joined this chess club here in our area a couple months ago, and up to that point I probably had only played 40 or 50 games over the board total. Played thousands of games online, but the over-the-board experience was very different. I'm not sure if very many people have this experience. For me, I went from playing, online exclusively to playing over the board, and it took me a few weeks just to get my bearings, just to kind of get a feel for the pieces and to see tactics. The board doesn't look the same as it does online, and so it's been now a couple months of playing, and it's just really been helpful for me to play these longer games. We play a weekly tournament, a game 20. There's a wide range of players there of all different ratings, and quite a few really strong players. And by that I mean, high 1900, 2000, 1800, around that range. So those are all significantly better than I am. So I learned a lot from playing them and going over the games. And my opponent that I played last night, one of the 3 games I played last night, was against a really strong player. He's probably 1900 USCF. At one point he was even higher than that. And I've played him quite a few times and lost every time that I've played him. And one thing you need to know about this opponent is that he always starts, when he's white, he always starts with b4. So he plays the Polish for white. And it's a little bit of an unusual opening and not one that I was familiar with. So it took me a while to kind of figure out a setup that I liked against it. My losses to him were not because of my opening. They were because of my play. But the positions I was getting out of the opening I didn't like that much, and so I decided to try something different on Wednesday of this week, and it had an interesting game, so I wanted to run through that and look at the analysis. So let's do that now. As I mentioned, my opponent started with b4, and that is not probably the most typical starting move for white. Most of you will know that e4, d4, and even c4 are all much more common. And even moves like knight f3 are aimed at playing either e4 or d4 in the future. In shorter time controls, and certainly at my level, it doesn't matter that much what opening you're playing, assuming you're not playing something terrible like a4 or h4 or something like that. All these openings are playable, but the Polish would definitely be more in the modern vein of theory, where you are eventually going to put the bishop on b2 and try to control the center at a distance. Really, every opening, to some degree or another, is all centered on a battle over the center. Who's going to control those squares? Who's going to have the most space? So my opponent plays the Polish, and for the first time I played on Wednesday of this week, I played b6 in response, and then played e6, and both of those moves were just preparing the eventual d5 and c5. I wanted to try to get this structure here. He pushed here, and actually I was kind of happy to see this. I'm not sure if, obviously the computer says that all these moves are fine, so there's no problem with any of these moves, but I was hoping to get my bishops on these 2 diagonals, and this is really the core of what I was hoping to get out of the opening, and this is not by any means winning, but just in terms of me being comfortable, I wanted to get bishops on these 2 diagonals, because one thing that I know from playing against the Polish now for a few weeks is it's pretty rare to castle queenside. If some pieces get traded off, and if the pawn structure gets locked up, I remember one game where I ended up playing a5, and he played a4, and with these pawns all kind of locked up, I remember that game he castled queenside. So it's not that you can't ever do that, but because of this early pawn push on the queenside and these pawns being advanced, it's more rare for the king to castle queenside. So I was anticipating a kingside castles at some point, and I thought that these bishops on the diagonals would be at least give me the chance for some pressure or an attack. So that's what I was aiming for here. And again, there's no problems here with either moves for black or white during the opening. We're really kind of keeping a distance. You can see there's no immediate clashes between any of our pawns on any of these squares. So it's really kind of just I don't know, I'd say it a calm kind of opening for black and white. I played here and traded off pieces on e5. And now, of course, I'm on the rook in the corner, so he has to do something. He plays the normal, very natural move, d4, which is probably going to be played anyway at some point. I took and dropped my queen back. He played knight d2, I castled, and I think at this point we're really through the opening and we have a structure in front of us. And as I was trying to evaluate kind of my next moves, my goal is to eventually get this bishop freed on b7, either by taking on c4 when it's convenient. At this point I wouldn't do that because he takes back with, you know, the knight and tempo on my queen, and that's not ideal. His knight might even come into e5, so I wouldn't take now, but eventually taking to open up the bishop, or if he ends up pushing and we have takes on c5, then eventually pushing my pawn to d4 would be another way of opening up that bishop. And that's really what I'm aiming to do, is get that bishop freed, and then with the half open file, eventually get my rooks to c8, one of my rooks to c8, and try to put some pressure down the file. So that's kind of my goal. Obviously he has a lot of space with his queenside pawns, and his bishop and knight just need to find good squares. And, you know, we have a game, obviously, just a fight here with out of the opening. So at this point in the game, we have the first mistake that was played by my opponent. He played knight b3. And you look at that move, and I don't know if you're like me, there doesn't immediately seem obvious why that is a huge mistake. There's no obvious win of material or tactic here. The reason why it's a mistake, and you'll see this play out in the rest of the game, is that when I take back here, and this is the only move that keeps my advantage, d takes c4 is the only move that maintains the advantage here, the -3 advantage, is that after I take and he takes back with the bishop, this bishop is really misplaced for the rest of the middle game. And there's an awkward arrangement of pieces. So he obviously wants to get his queen off of the back rank. He doesn't want to move his queen to c2 because my rook is coming to this file. You don't want to pin your queen intentionally. And so the other option, of course, is to try to, you know, get your queen off the back rank either to d2 or e2. What that means, though, is that if, at any point when I attack this bishop and that bishop moves, it means that this knight is now undefended. So that's just one small thing to keep in mind. You're always aware of the fact that that knight is not guarded. This pawn over here is currently being pressured by my queen, so this rook cannot easily move. So it's like his pieces are a little tied down, and so even without having obvious tactics available right now, already the computer is giving a -2.5 advantage to black. And you'll see in the game that I actually missed chances to take advantage of this a couple times. Luckily, my opponent gave me multiple chances to find the right moves, but you'll see how this plays out. So I played knight d5. I didn't have a specific intention here. I just knew that this seemed like a great outpost square for the knight, and so my goal was to get my knight planted there. Obviously, if he wants to take, probably taking with either the bishop or the queen would be great. If I take with the queen, I'm obviously threatening mate on g2. But there are obviously moves even with his own queen or with playing f3 that would block that. So it's not like it's an immediate losing move. But I wasn't at all worried if he wanted to take. But as it turns out, that's actually a mistake. You can see the computer gives it a mistake for me. And the reason, and this will be a common theme, is that the computer wants me to play either rook ac8 or rook fc8. And as I mentioned before, just put pressure on this bishop, which is slightly misplaced, and basically the idea is to put pressure on white before white has a chance to untangle and get his pieces to good squares. That's really what the point of this move was. He played queen g4. I looked at this move for a bit, trying to figure out if there was an immediate threat or anything I could take advantage of. The computer's recommending knight f4 at this point, and I did look at that line a little bit. It really gets into, I mean, it's not super complicated, but it's not a line that I would immediately have looked at. By playing knight f4, I am putting pressure now on the pawn, on g2. So really the only move here, if I do play knight f2, is to play g3. And then computer says move my knight back to g6. And you might say, well, what's been accomplished here? The point, I think, is just that this diagonal is now even weaker. So at any point, if my queen does get to d5, that whole diagonal is just open for attack, and there's going to be tactics here that he has to deal with for the rest of the game. So that is one possible line, and one that I was kind of being encouraged to play by the computer. But I actually ended up playing my knight back to f6. And again, I just wanted to get some pieces defending. Before that knight was back here, all of my pawns were, you know, just here with the queen. No immediate threats, but I moved my knight back. He moves his queen to h4. And again, this is a mistake for white, and the reason is that there are issues over here with these pieces. They're just awkwardly placed, and with the queen getting further away from those two pieces, he's not going to be in position to defend them or to help in the defense. So the computer gives the queen h4, marks it as a mistake. And next move here, I finally play the move that the computer's been wanting me to play for a few moves now. Rook ac8 puts pressure on this bishop. And at this point of the game, I remember my opponent taking at least 2, 3, maybe even 4 minutes to think about this move. And if you look at the position, you can probably understand why and appreciate why it took some extra time here. It's just an awkward position to deal with. Moving this bishop, like I said before, immediately opens up possibilities for queen d5 and, you know, mate threats on g2, as well as putting pressure on this knight. It's just not a fun position to deal with. And there are ways to avoid immediate, you know, mating threats. For example, you can go back here to e2, eventually move the bishop to f3. And so it's not by any means a completely losing position, but it's just difficult to figure out how to unwind. My opponent spent some time on this and ended up just playing. By the way, just so you know, the computer move is rook d2. They're saying defend that bishop and get this knight away from any future tactics where my queen comes to d5. But my opponent spent some time and decided to eventually play rook c1, rook fc1. And you can see the computer analysis just goes from, you know, -2.5, -3 to -6. And I'll stop here for a moment and give you a chance to notice the tactic. I did not find it. At least I didn't find it the first time. So maybe you've seen this. It's just the simple rook takes bishop. And if he takes back, queen d5, and I'm threatening the mate that I mentioned earlier, as well as the piece here on c4. So that's just a completely winning tactic, and one that I missed in the game. I knew I had pressure down the file, but I did not see right away that I had that tactic. So I instead played rook c7, just looking to double up on the file. And again, I didn't completely lose the advantage I had, but it was definitely not the correct move in that position. My opponent played g4, still apparently not seeing, just as I didn't see, the tactic on c4. And at this point, obviously, I was considering, my plan was to play rook c8 here, rook fc8. But I remember stopping and noticing the tactic here on c4 and did find it the second time. He takes back. He took back rather quickly as well. I don't even know that, I didn't look at the computer about this earlier, but yeah, either way, rook takes is definitely the best move. At this point, the tactic's already there. His best move in this position is going to be difficult to find. The best move, according to the computer, is rook c6. Just blocking that mate threat, and after takes, he's down the piece. This pawn is a little dangerous. It's something you have to keep an eye on, but with a piece up, it shouldn't be any problem for me to convert this position. But that is really the best that white has at this point. Instead, he played f3, blocking the immediate mate threat and giving a place for his queen to come back in defense. And I took the free rook on c4. You can see here -10, just a completely winning advantage. He defends the knight, which was obviously hanging at that point. I attack both pieces at once, and he brings the queen back. So in here he's trying to consolidate. Probably already knows it's a losing position, just trying to find tactics. And I think probably a couple moves ago, I don't remember exactly when, I felt really confident in the position. Definitely here when I noticed this tactic. I mean, I always have this feeling that when I'm playing stronger players that I'm probably missing something, that when I think I have a great tactic, there's probably a response I'm not expecting. So I don't normally get too excited right away, but after I take the rook here on c4, I know that I'm in a winning position. It's pretty obvious. My only fear here is not to dwindle the advantage, and I've done that in enough games to know that it's definitely possible. So after he defends and I play rook c2, he gets his queen back to defend. I'm able to win another pawn on f3, threatening mate here on g2. Again, you can see this common thread of just the weakness there and this diagonal with the bishop and the queen. He finds the best move, which is knight d2, which blocks the mate threat and also pressures or attacks my bishop on f3. I move my bishop back and maneuver, basically winning another pawn here. And on this check here next, I was surprised to see this because I thought the only chance he had was tricks and really just trying to get a mating threat with the pieces that were on the board. But he played G3, and I should point out that at this point he was really down on time. So I think I had 4 minutes or so, and he was down, I think, to a minute or two. So he was low on time. Obviously knows the position is not he's not better. He's obviously worse here. And so maybe it's just a time decision. Just it was an easier move to make in time trouble. I was happy to exchange. I'll point out here that the computer wants me to play queen d4 and keep the queen and put pressure on this knight since the rook is, since it's pinned to the rook, which is not defended. There's no way in the world that I'm playing that in a position like this. It's a total computer move. I am looking for the simplest way to finish off the game, and so I was happy to trade. In fact, my next move also trades pieces, and he does get his rook into d2, but with rook at a8, there's no threats. There's no weak pieces to attack, and my bishop is going to be planted firmly on d5. So he marches the king in. One other thing I missed here, I wasn't in time trouble, but he started to play faster, and just instinctively I was playing faster as well, and I did miss here after takes right here, that when he attacks my rook on a8, I can just take on d7, obviously, and we have a similar situation to what happened in the game. He can take my pawn on a7, but this pawn is queening. There's no way to stop that. In the game, instead of that, I played my rook back to d8. Eventually, we traded those pieces. He takes, and my pawn begins to march. I did have to trade my bishop here at the end on b7 just to ensure that his pawn didn't queen, and my opponent lost on time at this point. So the end of the game, I think, was pretty clean advantage, and I know for more experienced players, a -7, -8, -10 advantage is an easy win. I would be lying if I told you that I would win that 10 out of 10 times against every player. I definitely have struggled in the past with converting on advantages like that. So I just was happy to not have time trouble. That was a huge part of it for me in this game, is I did not get into time trouble like I have the last couple months in a lot of the games that I've played. And although I missed the tactics the first time, I was happy to see that I did see the tactic on c4, taking that bishop, and the threats that came after my queen gets to d5. So an interesting game. I would not call it a refutation of the Polish by any means, but it's definitely a position I'll look at again. I like the setup that I had here against the Polish compared to a lot of my other openings that I've played as black against the Polish. And yeah, just a fun game to play. It's good to get a win, and taking the time to look through the game afterward also pointed out that I probably missed the advantage. Certainly I missed it when he plays knight b3 here at this point. I did not notice that I had a significant advantage already. And this is really a positional advantage. It's not a concrete threat at this point, no lost material, but it's something I need to do better at evaluating positions and realizing that after takes here, the real point of attack for me is going to be the c-file, and getting my rooks to the c-file as soon as I can. That should have been my priority, especially before his queen is off the back rank. So it taught me a little bit about positional advantages and how to evaluate and look for those in the game. And I'll try to do better in the future at paying attention to those. But overall, an interesting game. Obviously, it's nice to win one. Last week, the game that I shared, I was winning at the end. I had a winning advantage, but I lost on time, and that's always a little bit heartbreaking. So it's nice to get the win, and definitely is an example of how these longer games are more beneficial for me to play and to look at and to take more time on moves. And just really, I'm really thankful to have the chance to meet and a good group of guys there at the chess club to play with every week. And whenever you get a chance to play people who are better than you, you should take that advantage. That's true in any game or any sport, and I have that opportunity here, so I'm definitely going to take advantage of it. Thankful for the game, and enjoyed going through it. Hopefully that was interesting, and we learned something from it. We'll be back next time with more training games, and maybe once a week, if I get a chance, if there's an interesting game from the chess club, I'll throw it on the channel and walk through it like I did here. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.